For some reason, empanadas are a lot more intimidating to make than they should be. It might be that crimped crust around the edge, but after making a batch, I realized I should have been making these a lot sooner. Empanadas can be filled with a lot of things, but today we're going to be making my favorite, which is a Filipino-style beef filling. And of course, just like any good empanada, we're going to be starting with a from-scratch crust, which requires no special equipment.
To get started with the dough, in a mixing bowl, add all-purpose flour, sugar, and fine salt. After giving it a quick 30-second stir, place it in the fridge for at least 2 hours. The key to a flaky crust is using cold ingredients, which will help prevent the butter from melting. Once the flour and mixing bowl are well chilled, add in the cubed, unsalted butter. Break the butter into its individual cubes and then give them a quick toss to get them coated in flour. When all of the butter is coated, start pressing the flour into the butter using just your fingertips. Then you can use a pastry blender to grind the pieces down finer, or if you don't have a pastry blender, just pick up a handful of the butter and grind it down in your hands. Both methods will get you the same result and should look something like this. Add in a large egg and then beat it well while mixing it together with the flour. You can beat the egg beforehand, but it doesn't really matter. Using ice cold water will also keep the butter cold. We are looking to hydrate the dough just enough for it to come together. For me, that was about 7 tablespoons of water. Add in half of the water, stir with a fork, and then add in the second half of water. Mix again using the fork, and then try to bring the dough together using your hands. The dough should be wet enough that it clumps together like wet sand. After trying to bring the dough together, you might have a small portion of it that just keeps crumbling off. Mix in a couple drops of water with this dry portion, and you should be good to go. The dough does not need to be completely smooth just yet. Overworking the dough can melt the butter and ruin the flakiness of the crust. When the dough just holds together as one big piece, wrap it in plastic and place it to chill in the fridge for at least an hour. While waiting for the dough to chill, it's a good time to start making the filling. Preheat a large skillet over medium heat, and when it's hot enough that a couple drops of water dance around in the pan, drizzle in enough oil to just coat the bottom. Add in a diced medium onion, and after a minute or so of constant stirring, add in a few cloves of freshly minced garlic. Stirring constantly for another minute or until the garlic becomes fragrant. It might seem like the pan is getting a little dry towards the end, but do not add any more oil because we're going to get plenty of rendered fat from the beef. If your burner heats unevenly like mine, you can push the garlic and onion towards the cooler side of the pan to make room for a pound of ground beef. We're looking to get a little bit of browning on the beef, so if your pan does heat evenly, you'll probably want to remove the garlic and onion from the pan and add it back later so it doesn't burn. Raise the heat to medium-high and spread out the beef to cover the bottom of the pan, then season with salt and black pepper. Now leave the ground beef alone so it can develop a little bit of crust on the first side. I should also mention that I'm using 85-15 ground beef. You'll want to stay away from fattier blends of ground beef such as 70-30 because it will make the filling a little too greasy. When there's some browning on the first side, you can break up the ground beef and mix it with the garlic and onion. Next, add in a cup of frozen green peas and carrots, a big spoonful of tomato paste, and 2 maybe weird ingredients, raisins and fish sauce. If you aren't too familiar with Filipino cooking, raisins and fish sauce might seem like odd ingredients to use in a beef filling, but raisins add much needed sweetness that really balance out those salty and bitter flavors.
And as for the fish sauce, this stuff might not smell that good, but don't let that scare you. It's kind of like a secret ingredient. You won't even taste it even if you know it's there, but it does add a little special something that you're not going to get by seasoning with just salt.
Now, even though we have the raisins, we still need to add a small amount of sugar to balance the bitterness from the tomato paste. Continue cooking the filling for a few minutes until fond starts forming on the bottom of the pan. Then add in a cup of water and scrape the bottom of the pan to deglaze it. Let the water boil off, stirring occasionally. This step will really help tenderize the beef. And when there's just enough water remaining that the ground beef is coated in sauce, turn off the heat and season to taste with salt and black pepper. We don't want the filling to be saucy because it'll just end up leaking out when cooking the empanadas. And if your filling is oily, you'll want to drain the excess oil before using it. While waiting for the filling to cool, we can return to working on the dough. Right now the dough is still quite rough, but instead of kneading the dough to smooth it out, I found the best and fastest thing to do is to press the dough out and fold it several times. You can do this with a rolling pin if you want, but I think it's good to use your hands so you can feel how the dough is coming along. Just press the dough out as wide as you can without using too much effort, and then fold the dough in half. The next time you go to press it out, the dough will not stretch as far. And with each fold, the dough will become smoother and stronger. After 6 or so folds, you'll eventually reach a point where it's pretty difficult to press the dough out, and you can stop here. The dough is much smoother than when we started, and has enough strength that it can be easily shaped, but still delicate enough that the crust will be flaky. Shape the dough into a rectangle and place it to firm up in the fridge for another hour. After the dough has chilled, cut the rectangle in half and divide the dough into 10 equal portions weighing around 54 grams each. Squeeze and roll each portion of dough in your hands to fuse the small pieces together. You want the dough ball to be as close to perfectly round as you can get it. After dividing and shaping the dough, place all the dough balls to chill in the fridge except for the one we're going to roll out first. Coat the dough in flour, then press it out into a coin shape using just your hands. I find that by starting with your hands, it's much easier to get a circular shape compared to starting with a rolling pin. If you start with a rolling pin, the dough can quickly take on an oval shape, and once you have an oval, you're kind of stuck having an oval, which is going to make a long and skinny empanada. When you have a small circle that is even in thickness, you can switch to using a rolling pin. Roll out the dough using light to medium pressure, giving it a small turn between each roll. The final thickness of the dough should resemble a thick tortilla and should have a diameter of about 5.5 inches. To fill the empanadas, just grab a big spoonful of the filling and place it in the center of the dough. Make sure to be generous with the filling because as long as you can still close it, overfilling really isn't a thing. To close it, stretch one half of the dough over the filling, and you can use your thumbs to keep the filling away from the edge. Then just go around the perimeter to seal it, but be careful not to get any filling caught in between the seam because it will interfere with the crimp. Now some people crimp the edge using a fork, but we're not going to be doing that here. The far better looking way is to crimp the dough using your fingers. To crimp the dough, use the thumb and index finger of your left hand to stretch and fold the dough over the index finger of your right hand. Your right finger holds the dough in place to create distinct lines with each fold. It might be a little tricky at first, but after 1 or 2 empanadas, you'll find that it's actually quite easy and you'll be a pro at crimping in no time. After you've finished crimping, place the empanadas onto a parchment-lined baking sheet that's set up in the fridge. You should have just enough filling to make 10 generously filled empanadas. Let the empanadas chill in the fridge for at least 1 hour before cooking them. To get a shiny crust, we'll be doing a double glaze. Brush the empanadas with an egg wash, which is just a well-beaten egg with a splash of water. Let it dry for 5 minutes and then brush them again with a second coating of the glaze. Skip the glaze if you decide to fry instead of bake. To bake these, place them on the center rack of an oven preheated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit using the convection setting. Bake for 32 to 35 minutes or until the crust is golden brown and looks something like this. When you're finished baking your empanadas, you'll want to immediately transfer them to a cooling rack. This will help keep the crust nice and crisp. They only need to be on the rack for a few minutes before eating, just until the filling is cool enough that it doesn't burn your mouth as soon as you try to take a bite. If you're going to fry your empanadas, place a pot over medium heat and fill it with about 2 inches worth of vegetable oil. When the oil reaches 350 degrees Fahrenheit, gently lay in the empanadas and do not overcrowd the pot. If you need to fry a lot of empanadas all at once, I would recommend using a wok. When you lay in the empanadas, they will initially sink to the bottom, but will rise back to the surface in about 20 seconds. As they start to brown on the first side, flip them over to get some browning on the second side, and continue flipping them as needed so both sides cook evenly. One thing that's cool about frying is that the empanadas cook a lot faster than they do in the oven. While it takes half an hour to bake in the oven, in the fryer with only about 3 to 4 minutes of total cooking time, the empanadas will be finished and have a golden brown crust all over. When the empanadas are finished frying, you can remove them from the oil and transfer them to a wire rack to cool.
So I wanted to do a quick comparison between a fried empanada and a baked empanada to see if it's really worth the hassle of frying. So first, I'm gonna try the baked empanada. Okay, so now I'm gonna try the fried one. Mainly I've been having these baked, but let's see if it's worth frying. So after trying both empanadas side by side, I really don't think I can pick a winner. I initially thought that I was gonna pick the baked empanada and say that the fried empanada isn't worth all the hassle. You know, frying is really just a big thing because when you're finished, you have this big pot of oil and you don't know what to do with it. So if you're gonna fry something in it, it really has to be worth your time. And I do think it's worth frying the empanadas. It just depends what you're looking for. With the baked empanadas, you get more of a crispy and a hard outer texture. Versus with the fried empanadas, the outside is plenty crisp, but it's also much softer too. And more delicate. That's how I would describe it compared to the baked empanada. And I was expecting to taste a lot of oil when eating this, but you really don't pick up too much oil through the frying process. So I would say it really just comes down to what you have a taste for, whether you should go baked or fried, or if you want to deal with the mess of cleaning up a pot of oil. And I would say you really can't go wrong with either way. But I would say that if you do plan on freezing your empanadas, I would just recommend baking those and only fry fresh empanadas. I don't really think frozen empanadas are gonna work too well in the fryer just because the crust fries up so quickly. The center, the filling probably won't have enough time to warm up if it was in the freezer.
Before ending the video, I just want to quickly show a cross section of one of the empanadas. If you look at the crust, you can see that it has thin, crisp layers. This is thanks to the butter and keeping the dough cold. Refrigerating the dough throughout the process might seem tedious, but it is crucial for having a flaky crust.
So hopefully through this video, you were able to learn how to make empanadas, and the next time you're craving them, you'll be able to make your own batch from scratch.